I'd been on my feet since 4 in the afternoon. Table 9 needed their bill. Table 3 wanted to split their check 5 ways. The kitchen was backed up and my section was full. And somewhere between the breadbasket and the dessert menu, I'd convinced myself tonight might actually be a good night. Good tips, maybe enough to finally send in that culinary school application I'd been staring at for 3 months. That's when I reached across table 6 to clear a glass. It slipped, just for a second, just enough. The wine caught the edge of Mateo's jacket, expensive, white, ruined. And before I could even finish saying, "I'm so sorry," his chair scraped back and his hand shot out and I was on the floor. Just like that. A full restaurant, a Friday night, people mid-bite, mid-laugh, mid-conversation, and not one of them moved. I remember the sound more than anything. The glass hitting the floor, the room going quiet, Mateo's voice cutting through it all, loud, deliberate. The voice of a man who had never once been told no and intended to keep it that way. "Look at what you did. Do you have any idea who I am?" I was still on the floor when I heard the sound of a chair being pushed back. Slow, unhurried. I looked up. There was a man across the restaurant setting his glass down on the table with the kind of quiet that isn't quiet at all. Dark suit, completely still face, eyes that had already made a decision. He stood up, and the whole room shifted. He didn't run, he didn't shout. He just walked. Straight across the restaurant, through the gap between tables, past the other diners who were still frozen in their seats. His pace was steady, like he had all the time in the world, like he already knew exactly how this was going to end. Mateo saw him coming and straightened up. He was still riding the rush of what he'd just done, still wearing that look, the one that said he owned every room he walked into. He smiled, the kind of smile that expects backup. "This doesn't concern you," Mateo said. The man stopped. He looked at Mateo the way you look at something written in very small print. Calm, patient, unbothered. "Leave," he said. Just that one word. No anger behind it, no threat in his voice. Just a simple fact being stated to someone who hadn't understood the situation yet. Mateo laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Do you know who I am?" The man didn't answer. He just held eye contact. And something happened to Mateo's face. The smile didn't disappear all at once. It faded the way light fades when a cloud moves across the sun, slowly, then completely. His eyes moved past the man's shoulder and I followed his gaze. 2 men in dark suits were standing behind him. I hadn't seen them come in. I didn't know where they had come from. They weren't doing anything aggressive. They were just standing there, still and quiet, like punctuation at the end of a sentence. Mateo's lawyer voice was gone. Whatever he said next was low and quick, and I didn't catch it. One of the men in suits spoke to him, just as quietly, and then Mateo straightened his jacket, picked up his phone from the table, and walked toward the exit, not fast enough to look scared, just fast enough to be leaving. The room started breathing again. I was still on the floor. I hadn't moved. I think some part of me was waiting for something else to go wrong, because in my experience, something always does. But then he crouched down in front of me, this man whose name I didn't know yet, and he held out his hand. I took it. He helped me to my feet in one smooth motion, like it was the easiest thing. "Are you hurt?" "No," I said. Automatic. The word was out before I'd even checked. He looked at me, not the quick, polite look people give when they want permission to stop worrying about you. A real look, the kind that takes a second longer than comfortable. He didn't argue. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a card. Plain, no logo, just a name and a number printed in clean, dark letters. He placed it in my hand and closed my fingers around it. "If your manager gives you trouble over this," he said quietly, "call that number." Then he went back to his table, sat down, and picked up his glass, like nothing had happened. I stood in the middle of the restaurant still holding his card, my hand still shaking, and I thought, who is this man? I told myself it would be fine. All the way home on the bus, card tucked into my apron pocket, I kept saying it quietly in my head like a prayer. It will be fine. He caused a scene. Everyone saw it. It will be fine. I almost believed it. My phone rang at 8:45 the next morning. My manager, Gerald. His voice was tight and careful, the voice of a man reading from a script someone else had written for him. "We need you to come in, not for your shift, just to talk." I knew before I even got there. Gerald sat behind his desk and looked at the wall behind my head the entire time he spoke. There had been a complaint from a guest. Given the circumstances, management had decided it was best to pause my schedule pending a review of the incident. He used the word pause 3 times. He never once used the word fired, but we both understood what was happening. I asked him directly, "Was it Mateo?" He shuffled the papers on his desk. "I'm not able to share the details of the complaint." That was answer enough. Priya caught me on my way out. She pulled me into the break room and closed the door behind us, her voice dropping low even though we were alone. "He's a city councilman," she said. "Mateo, did you know that?" I shook my head. "He has connections to the licensing board. One phone call from him and this place gets inspected every week until they find something to write up." She squeezed my arm. "Fernanda, I'm sorry, but they're not going to choose you over that. They can't afford to." I nodded. I thanked her. I walked out into the morning and stood on the pavement outside the restaurant and thought about the culinary school application sitting unfinished on my laptop at home. 3 months of staring at it. Now I couldn't even keep the job that was supposed to pay for it. I reached into my pocket and pulled out his card. I stood there for a long time. A bus went past, a woman walked by pushing a stroller. Normal life, moving at its normal speed, while mine sat completely still. I almost threw it away. I told myself I didn't need help from a stranger, that asking for it would mean owing something I didn't understand yet, that people like me figure things out on their own, because that's the only option we've ever had. Then I thought about Gerald staring at the wall, about Mateo walking out of that restaurant last night like a man who had never once faced a consequence. I called. He answered on the second ring. I told him everything, the call from Gerald, the suspension, what Priya had said about the licensing board. I kept my voice steady because I refused to cry on the phone with a man I didn't know. When I finished, there was a pause. Not an uncomfortable one, the kind that means someone is actually thinking before they speak. "I'll handle it," he said. "Don't go back to that building until I tell you it's safe." The call ended. I stood on that pavement not knowing whether I'd just made everything better or handed my problems to someone who would make them into something I couldn't come back from. Probably both, I thought. Probably both. Camilla was waiting up for me. She had tea made and that look on her face, the one she gets when she already knows something is wrong and is giving me the space to say it first. I sat down at our kitchen table and told her everything. The spill, Mateo, the man who stood up, the card, the call that morning, the suspension, the other call. She listened without interrupting, which is rare for Camilla. When I finished, she picked up her phone. "What's his full name?" "The card just says Santiago." She turned the phone toward me 2 minutes later. "Santiago Reyes." The search results filled the screen fast. Too fast. The way results do when someone has been written about many times by many different people. A construction company with projects across 4 cities, 3 upscale restaurants, a charitable foundation that funded youth programs in low-income neighborhoods, a profile in a business magazine from 2 years ago, a photo of him at a charity gala, dark suit, same calm expression, shaking hands with the mayor. Then Camilla scrolled further. The headlines got quieter, but heavier. Associates questioned in a federal investigation, no charges filed. A court case referencing his company that was dismissed before trial. his name appearing in the background of 3 separate news stories about power deals in the city, never as the main subject, always just present, like weather. "Fernanda," Camilla set the phone down, "this man doesn't help people for free." "I know that." "Do you?" She wasn't being unkind, she was being Camilla, which meant she was going to say the thing out loud that I was working hard not to think about. "Because you called him, and now he's involved. And men like this, the kind who never get charged with anything, they don't get that way by being generous." I didn't have an answer for that, so I went to bed and stared at the ceiling for a long time. 48 hours later, Gerald called again. Different voice this time, warmer, almost apologetic, which from Gerald was practically a miracle. Management had completed their review, the incident had been assessed, and it was clear that I had not been at fault. My position was reinstated effective immediately. There would also be an adjustment to my hourly rate, a raise, he said, that was long overdue. He said long overdue like it had been his idea all along. I said thank you and hung up and sat very still on my couch. Mateo had gone completely quiet. No follow-up complaint, no licensing threats, nothing. Whatever had happened in those 48 hours, I hadn't seen any of it. I had just felt the result. I called Santiago. He answered the same way he had before. Second ring, no greeting, just presence. I said they called me back, with a raise. "Good. You didn't have to do that." "I know." There was a pause, comfortable somehow for a man I had spoken to twice. "Have dinner with me," he said. "Friday. I'll send the address." It wasn't really a question, but it didn't feel like a demand either. It felt like a door being opened and someone standing back to let me decide whether to walk through. "Okay," I said. I don't know why it felt like the most important word I'd said in years. The restaurant was small and unhurried. No valet, no velvet rope, just a narrow front door on a quiet street, warm light coming through the window, the kind of place that doesn't need to advertise, because the people who know about it tell the right people. Santiago was already at the table when I arrived. He stood when he saw me, which I hadn't expected. No bodyguards that I could see. No performance, just a table for 2 near the window and a man who waited until I was comfortable before he sat back down. The menu had no prices. I noticed that immediately and decided not to mention it. He didn't talk about what happened at the restaurant, not once. He asked where I grew up, whether I still had family close by, how long I'd been in the city. Normal questions, except the way he asked them wasn't small talk. He was actually listening, tracking details, remembering things I said 3 sentences ago and connecting them to something I said after. It had been so long since someone sat across from me and actually paid attention that I kept stopping mid-sentence, half expecting him to check his phone. He never did. Somewhere between the main course and the end of the meal, he asked what I'd wanted to be before waiting tables became the whole plan. I did what I always do. I offered the small version first. "I've been looking into culinary programs," I said, casual, like it was a passing thought and not something I'd been aching toward for 3 years. "There's a certification course, not a full degree or anything, just something that could open different doors." "Which program?" I told him. He nodded like he knew it. "Why haven't you applied?" "It's expensive. The timing hasn't been right." He was quiet for a moment. "That's not what I asked." I looked up. "I asked why you haven't applied," he said again, steady, not pushing, just refusing to accept the answer I'd given, which wasn't really an answer at all. Nobody had ever done that before, pushed past the practical excuse to the real one underneath. I didn't know what to do with it, so I looked at my plate and said nothing. And he didn't fill the silence with something easier. He just let it sit there until it meant something. I changed the subject and he let me, but the question stayed at the table for the rest of the meal. When the plates were cleared, he leaned back and looked at me with that same level expression he'd worn in the restaurant on Friday night. "Mateo has been made to understand," he said, "that you're not a person he should think about anymore." I set down my water glass. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means you can walk to your car at night without looking over your shoulder."
The way he said it was so straightforward, like it was simple, like that particular fear, the low, constant hum of it that I'd been carrying around for 2 days, was just a problem with a solution, and the solution had already been applied. I didn't ask what the solution was. Some part of me already understood that I wasn't supposed to. I thanked him for dinner and he walked me to the door, and that was it. No pressure, no expectation waiting behind his eyes, just get home safe. I thought about his question the whole way there. Why haven't you applied? Not the money, he'd already seen through that. The real answer was one I hadn't said out loud to anyone. Because I was afraid the answer would be no, and some doors, once they close in your face, you stop trying to open.
I noticed the car on Tuesday morning. Dark, parked across the street from my building. I saw it through the kitchen window while I was making coffee and told myself it meant nothing. People park on that street all the time. It was probably nothing. Wednesday morning, it was there again. Same spot, same car, no one getting in or out, just sitting. I stood at the window longer than I should have, coffee going cold in my hand, running through reasonable explanations. A neighbor's visitor, someone waiting for a delivery, anything that made it ordinary. I got dressed, kept my eyes forward when I walked out the front door, and told myself I was being paranoid. I almost believed it. Again. Camila called me that afternoon. She'd been doing more digging. I hadn't asked her to, but that's the thing about Camila. Once something worries her, she can't leave it alone. I found something, she said. Her voice had that careful, controlled quality that meant the information was worse than she wanted it to be. 2 other women, both waitstaff, both filed complaints against Mateo in the last 4 years. She paused. Both complaints were dropped within a month, and both women left their jobs not long after. The coffee I'd been reheating suddenly smelled wrong. How did they leave? I asked. Quietly. No forwarding information. One of them deleted all her social media. Another pause. Fernanda, I don't think he was ever going to stop at 1. I sat down on the kitchen floor. Not dramatically. My legs just made the decision without asking me first. I had never been the target. I had just been the next one. My hands were shaking when I called Santiago. I noticed them shaking and felt almost annoyed by it. I'd been holding myself together for days, and now, at the moment I needed to sound steady, my own body was giving me away. He answered immediately. I told him about the car, about the 2 women Camila had found, about the dropped complaints and the sudden quiet disappearances. I kept my voice as level as I could manage. When I finished, the silence on his end was different from the ones before. Those had felt thoughtful. This one felt like temperature dropping. Are you inside your apartment right now? Yes. Stay there, lock the door, don't open it for anyone until I call you back. Santiago, I'll call you back. He hung up. Within 2 hours, I saw them from my window. 2 men in dark coats, positioned at either end of my building's entrance, still, watchful. The car across the street was gone. Santiago arrived at 7 that evening. I buzzed him up, and when I opened the door, something was different about him immediately. He was composed the way he always was, jacket straight, expression controlled, but underneath it something had shifted. There was a tightness around his jaw, a stillness that wasn't the calm kind. He looked at me first, checked me over the way you check something you were afraid might be broken. You're all right, he said. It wasn't quite a question. I'm all right. He nodded slowly and looked away, and that's when I saw it, just for a second, just past the edge of all that control, something that looked like anger. Not the hot, loud kind Mateo carried, something older and quieter and far more serious. It frightened me. But not because I thought it was aimed at me. That was the part I hadn't expected. It frightened me because I understood, standing in my own doorway, that whatever came next for Mateo, Santiago was going to make absolutely certain of it, and I wasn't sure I wanted to know the details. My mother called on Thursday. Camila had mentioned Santiago's name to her cousin, who mentioned it to someone else, and by the time the information reached Dona Beatriz, it had already been sitting in her chest long enough to become worry. My mother's worry doesn't arrive quietly. It arrives as a phone call that lasts 40 minutes and covers every possible way a situation could go wrong, in order from least to most catastrophic. I let her talk. I said, "Yes, Mama," and "I know, Mama," in the right places. I told her I was being careful. She didn't believe me, but she ran out of arguments eventually, and we said goodbye, and I sat on my couch feeling 12 years old again. Sunday dinner at home was supposed to feel normal. It didn't. I knew something was wrong the moment I walked in and found Camila already there. Camila only comes to Sunday dinner when my mother personally invites her, which my mother only does when she wants reinforcement. My cousin Marcus was there too, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee and the specific expression of a man who has prepared what he wants to say. Marcus works in insurance fraud investigation. He has spent 15 years watching people with money and influence operate just far enough outside the rules to stay untouchable. He doesn't trust easily, and he doesn't soften things. They laid it all out on the table like evidence. The charitable foundation, generous on the surface, but the financial structure didn't quite add up under closer reading. The associates who kept appearing in federal cases and then disappearing from them. The pattern of Santiago's name showing up near major decisions in the city without ever being the one who made them officially. Men like this collect people, Marcus said. He wasn't being cruel, he was being precise. They do something for you that you can't repay, and then one day when they need something, you find out you've been owing them the whole time. They just hadn't presented the bill yet. My mother refilled everyone's water and said nothing, which from her was the loudest possible agreement. I listened to all of it. I didn't argue. I ate my food and helped clear the plates, and drove home and told myself they were right to be careful, that love makes people cautious, that I should take it seriously. Then I opened my laptop. I don't know exactly what I was looking for. Something that would either confirm everything Marcus had said or give me a reason to push back against it. I searched Santiago's name again, deeper this time, going past the first few pages of results into the older, quieter records. I found it buried in a local court archive, 15 years old, a workplace harassment case. The complainant was a domestic worker named Rosa Reyes, his mother. Santiago had been 19, listed as a witness. The employer had denied everything. The case was dropped 2 months after it was filed. Insufficient evidence, the record said. 3 months after that, the employer's business license was revoked. Health violations, zoning issues, a cascade of small official problems that added up to closure. No connection to Santiago was ever established. Nothing was ever charged. I sat with the screen open for a long time. Marcus had said he collects people, that one day he presents the bill. But what I was looking at didn't look like collecting. It looked like a 19-year-old boy who had watched something happen to his mother and found the only way available to him to answer it. I closed the laptop. I didn't know what to do with that, but I knew it had changed something. He texted Sunday night, "Walk tomorrow morning. I'll come to you. 8 o'clock. No bodyguards arrived with him this time. He came alone, hands in his jacket pockets, and we walked to the waterfront path 2 blocks from my building without much conversation. The morning was cool and quiet. Joggers passed us. A man walked a dog. Everything around us was completely ordinary. I waited until we found a bench near the water before I said anything. "I found a court record," I said. 15 years old, a harassment case. The complainant was Rosa Reyes. He didn't tense. He didn't look away. He just kept watching the water like he'd been expecting this particular conversation to arrive eventually and had decided in advance not to run from it. "Yes," he said. "Your mother." "Yes." I waited. He was quiet for long enough that I thought he might leave it at just that, a confirmation and nothing more. But then he exhaled slowly and started talking. His mother had worked for a wealthy family on the north side of the city for 11 years, cooking, cleaning, managing the house. She was good at it, and she was proud of it, and she never complained, not once, not to him. He found out what was happening not because she told him, but because he was 12 years old and he came to pick her up from work one afternoon and walked in through the service entrance and heard it. The man of the house was screaming at her, not about anything real. A dish had been placed on the wrong side of the table, something small and meaningless that had become in that moment a reason to make her feel like nothing in front of a room full of guests. And his mother stood there and took it, because she needed the job and she had a son to feed, and there was no version of that moment where she could afford to fight back. Santiago had stood in the doorway of that kitchen, 12 years old, and done nothing. Not because he didn't want to, because he had nothing, no power, no money, no leverage, nothing but his own rage, which was useless. "I told myself," he said, his voice still level but lower now, "that if I ever had the ability to stop something like that from happening, I would, without hesitation, without waiting to see if someone else would handle it." He turned and looked at me directly. "You were on the floor," he said, "and everyone in that room looked away." He paused. "I couldn't." The water moved. A bird crossed the sky above us. I had spent a week trying to figure out what kind of man he was, whether the protection had a price, whether Marcus was right, whether I was being naive. I had turned it over and over, looking for the angle I was missing. I reached over and put my hand over his. He looked down at it, not quickly, slowly, the way you look at something unexpected, something you hadn't planned for and don't quite know how to receive. His expression didn't change exactly, but something around the edges of it did, something that had been held tightly for a long time. He didn't pull away. We sat like that for a while, not saying anything, the city moving around us like it had no idea what was happening on that bench. Maybe it was that simple, I thought. Maybe some things begin the way his did, not with strategy or agenda, but with a 12-year-old boy in a doorway making a promise to himself that the man kept. It happened quietly. That was the part I hadn't expected. I think I'd imagined something loud, an arrest, a headline with his name in large letters, some public, visible moment where the world looked at what he had done and said clearly, this was wrong. But that isn't how it happened. It unfolded the way water gets into a wall, slowly, invisibly, and then all at once. The City Ethics Board announced an investigation on a Wednesday morning. I read about it on my phone during my break at work. Mateo's name, multiple incidents, multiple complaints from women in service industries, spanning nearly 5 years. The evidence, the article said, had been submitted through several independent channels and was extensive and well documented. No mention of Santiago anywhere, not a single sentence. I called Camila. She was already reading it. "How does someone gather that much evidence that cleanly?" she said. "I don't know," I said. We both knew I was lying. Mateo resigned from the council 8 days later. No dramatic statement, just a short letter about choosing to spend more time with his family, the kind of language that means something entirely different from what it says. His lawyer released a separate document shortly after, a formal settlement acknowledgement that included, buried on the second page, a written apology issued to me by name. Fernanda Oliveira, by name, in writing. Camila brought it to my apartment printed on paper because she said some things deserved to exist on something more solid than a screen. She sat next to me at the kitchen table while I read it. I got through the first paragraph before I started crying. Not because I was sad. That's the thing about that kind of crying. It doesn't feel like sadness when it's happening. It feels like something that has been pressing against you from the inside, finally finding a way out. I cried because someone had written my name in a document that said what happened to me was wrong, official, documented, real. Camila put her arm around me and didn't say anything, which was exactly right.
I had stopped asking to be believed such a long time ago that I'd forgotten what it felt like. It felt like this, like your lungs remembering how to take a full breath. Santiago called that evening. He didn't open with information, he didn't explain anything or reference anything he may or may not have done. He just asked, in the same straightforward way he always spoke, the same question he had asked me the very first night when I was still on the floor of the restaurant. "How are you feeling?" I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because it was the exact right thing to ask, and somehow I hadn't seen it coming. I thought about the careful, minimal way I'd been answering questions for years, the habit of making myself smaller so disappointment had less to find, the practiced shrug, the "I'm fine" that didn't mean anything. "Like, maybe things can actually be different," I said. The words surprised me on the way out. They were too honest and too open, and I couldn't take them back. I didn't want to. A pause. Then, "Good." Just that one word. But the way he said it, steady and certain, like he'd been waiting for me to arrive at that sentence for weeks, made it feel like enough. Like more than enough.
6 months is not a long time, but it can be enough to make a life unrecognizable. I was standing in a commercial kitchen on a Tuesday morning, learning how to break down a whole fish properly, when I realized I hadn't thought about the restaurant floor in weeks. Not once. The memory hadn't disappeared. I didn't think it ever fully would, but it had stopped being the first thing my brain reached for when I woke up. Something else had taken its place, something that felt, cautiously, like forward. The culinary program was harder than I'd expected and better than I'd hoped. The instructor was demanding in the way that only people who genuinely love their subject can be. I stayed late most days. I took notes in the margins of my margins. I came home tired in a way that was completely different from 9 hours on a restaurant floor. Not the tired of enduring, but the tired of actually using yourself for something. The scholarship that covered my tuition was administered by a foundation I hadn't heard of before my acceptance letter arrived. I didn't think much about it initially. Then one evening, I looked up the foundation's registered address and recognized the street. I sat with that information for a day before I brought it up to Santiago over dinner. He didn't deny it. He also didn't make it into a moment. "You said you wanted to apply," he said, like that explained everything. Because to him, it did. I didn't argue. I just made a note to myself that one day I would find a way to pay it forward, even if I couldn't pay it back. Santiago had become a regular part of my life in the way that real things do, not with a formal announcement, but through accumulation. Dinners that ran long because neither of us was in a hurry. Phone calls that started as check-ins and turned into actual conversation. His presence that felt, over time, less like rescue and more like company. One evening, he took me to a rooftop he owned. The city spread out below us in every direction, lit up and moving, indifferent to the two of us standing at the railing looking out at it. He told me he was done keeping distance. He said it simply, the way he said most things. Then he told me he wanted me to choose him knowing exactly what that meant. His world, his complications, the parts that didn't fit neatly into any version of a normal life. He wasn't asking me to overlook any of it. He was asking me to walk in with my eyes open. I thought about who I had been 6 months ago, standing on a pavement outside a restaurant, holding a card from a stranger, trying to decide if asking for help made me weak or just human. "Yes," I said. Not because he had saved me. I needed him to understand that. The person I was becoming, the one with fish-breaking calluses on her hands and margin notes in her textbooks, and a future she was actually building, that person was mine. I had done that. But she felt most real when he was around. He didn't respond with a speech. He reached into his jacket pocket and pressed a key into my hand, closed my fingers around it the same way he had closed them around his card that first night. Not pressure,
he said quietly. "Just so you know there's somewhere that's yours if you need it." I held it the whole drive home. I didn't let go.